hope you're all comfortable, but not too at ease. You see, in this realm of positive and negative passions, light and dark, into all things which constitute good and evil, a hero is about to be born. His or her journey will not be an easy one, I fear. How it will all turn out is anybody's guess. It all depends on the choices they will make and how they navigate the playing field designed in accordance with their needs by the gods of writing, who will guide, nurture, and torture them in the worst possible manner. Story structure can be quite controversial. We might even say it's the place where controversy is born. Lives can easily be lost within the labyrinth. If you're unsure how to construct your hero's story properly, the paradigm will not hold. It will end like a piece of overripe fruit falls from the branch, hitting the earth to lie there and rot. Before structure became that formula we so often see in so many tomes and flickers, what was it? Because story structure has been around before the cat was ever in need of saving, or any story existing within our lifetimes. That is what we will be discussing on this episode of the Story Detective. Don't touch that dial. All structure is based on psychology. Some people believe psychology to be an inexact science due to the fact that not everyone can be profiled. However, you can get pretty darn far in determining most people and even get a reasonable distance in determining quite a few characteristics for those villains claiming to be unprofilable due to their unpredictability. Stories are about human nature, so it stands to reason psychology would play a large part in the foundational makeup of the art of fiction. The behavioral patterns, the way in which your main character comes at the core problem within your story, is therefore at the heart of structure. Essentially, it's physics at work, and that every action has an equal and opposing reaction. We can no more escape that than we can change the nature of the human race. Fiction writing is by design, art imitating life. And what is art but a simulacrum of the reality we see blossoming from 7.8 billion people, their wants, needs, and opinions bumping up against one another. And each of those 7.8 billion stories is about a character who will represent the core emotional story, go through the psychological paces of his or her nature. And those paces will be as unique as each of those characters. There will also be some universal similarities to make them likable, relatable, or at least interesting, because that's life. We're all a bit similar, and we're all slightly unique. Story structure defined is a canvas upon which are placed the psychological stages in which most human beings go through when dealing with a problem large enough to be life-changing. It represents a path in which they will either evolve or won't, win or lose, and in some cases, live or die. It's up to you to tailor those psychological stages to best fit your characters, through which we will vicariously experience the particular slice of the world they inhabit. You've probably seen those graphs for 3-act structure, dividing the acts with lines which rise and then sharply decline in action. At first glance, they really don't tell you a lot. And if a fledgling writer takes the 3rd act decline literally, they might find their story ending prematurely, then diminishing instead of building. On the other hand, sometimes 3-act structure is referred to as having 4 acts. There's a reason for that, and why I prefer to think of it as such, because the 2nd act is divided in half by the midpoint. So when people start talking about that long middle where you can get into trouble, it always sounds to me like a recipe for failure. You're not crossing the Sahara, you're writing two distinctly different psychological shifts. Go all the way back to the hero's journey, and you'll find 4 distinct quarters within 12 beats, just like a ticking clock. There are other teachings, like Sid Field's screenplay, developed back in 1979, a decade before Blake Snyder of Save the Cat fame sold his first screenplay. So if you want to understand the proud parent of Save the Cat, you may want to pick up the book which Snyder took his cues from, and practically everyone else since. If you take the next book you read, or your favorite books that you may want to reread at some point, divide them into 4 equal quarters, you'll see the major psychological shifts occurring right about those quarter marks, or within a few pages of it. We're going to take a look at what each of those quarters consists of in future videos. For now, we will summarize the psychology behind the first quarter, or Act 1. It's not a roadmap, but a canvas laying down the base shifts of your emotional core, how your character might imitate life while digesting their evolution. The first quarter sets the stage, upon which your characters will play out the drama of their lives. How dramatic does it have to be, you may be asking? Because I know there's someone out there writing that slice of life novel that wants to uplift readers, not distress them. Few people have perfect lives, with friends who come to their rescue, bring food when they're hungry, pay their bills when things get tough. In most cases, when trauma, injuries, or disabilities are present, many friends and relatives will react the same way as if their condition were contagious, or will eventually become a burden. And while they may genuinely feel bad for their friend or family member because they're having difficulties, their own coping mechanisms or financial capabilities will cause them to react cautiously, fearfully, or even angrily, distancing themselves from that person on a level they sometimes can't fully understand themselves. Even if your character does have a caring support system, you may want to ask yourself how they might fend for themselves if they found their support suddenly taken away. How would they learn to overcome that kind of adversity on their own? People pay to see whether or not characters can succeed on their own merits, how they use their wits and skills when faced with a potential life-changing situation. There may be some good Samaritans along the way that give them guidance, a meal, temporary shelter, but whatever the chief story problem is facing your main character, they have to be the catalyst for the solution. If they get rescued, then the rescuer just might be more of a hero than the character in need of a rescue, and possibly you should consider telling their story. People certainly pay for uplifting stories, don't get me wrong, but your audience is uplifted by the actions your hero takes in order to meet their goal, rise above difficulty, and grow from the experience. What you are setting up in the first quarter is where your hero is before that life-altering situation fully blossoms. Some questions and points to consider about what you'll be establishing within the first 25%. Number 1. Establish your genre. It should be clear within the first page to a page and a half the type of story your reader is getting themselves into. 2. Introduce your hero. Show us their life, their world, what's important to them, and also what's missing in their lives. Because they have a want, and what do they want? Badly, in other words. And it has to be linked intricately to who they are within their heart of hearts, because what they want has to be important enough to fight for it. If they don't step up to the plate, what do they risk losing? Which brings us to point 3, establish the stakes. Number 4, who is the villain? There's usually someone standing in the hero's way, or causing the stakes to rise if the hero should fail. Okay, what if the problem is just losing their job? Or the story focuses on the problems of society in general, because the status quo isn't conducive to your character supporting themselves or meeting the needs of their family. That's fine. but it can be much harder to do, especially for newer writers. When the conflict is entirely inside a character's head, the risk is that what they do in their exterior life can seem as if they're running in circles, encountering problems randomly, or it can feel like episodic writing to your readers. If it's all inside a character's head, then what happens in the reader's imagination while they're reading? If the answer is, well, we see the character working, or watching TV, taking a nature walk, or doing just everyday innocuous activities, then you best be one damn good wordsmith, because how many of us writing a first novel are amazing wordsmiths or have the hang of it unless we've been already writing for a decade before we put that first novel out? 5. Introduce the supporting cast. Family, friends, co-workers. What do they represent to your hero? Everyone in our lives represents some part of our psyche, our various interests, habits, problems, and fears. How does your supporting cast offer your hero what they need, or what they think they need? Maybe their angry boss is a living manifestation of their childhood trauma, and if they can't fill whatever is missing in their life, how do some members of the supporting cast represent what's lacking, exacerbate the hero's fears, show anti-support through advice that could damage their primary goal, or squash their dreams or hopes? Are there some potential friendships or even loved ones who might turn away or turn on them as soon as they smell danger or risk involved? In a sense, every beginning is also an ending. The final moments of what was previously before the present story, because the leftover baggage, whatever has wounded them most deeply, is what they will have to overcome during whatever is to come. Their chief story goal only has impact if you show what they need to overcome in order to achieve it. What are their bad habits, and what way are they possibly not so nice? How has their upbringing caused bad programming or triggers to certain stimuli? In what way are they psychologically defensive in order to protect their wound? Right in the middle of Act 1, there comes an inciting incident which is commonly referred to as the call to action. This call is a glimpse into the main story problem. It's not large enough yet to move them out of their status quo of life, but it can be related directly or indirectly to the villain. This glimpse, in fact, can be overwhelming or sometimes even terrifying, because through that doorway that they glimpse this, the hero knows that it's going to completely upend their life, and possibly those of family, friends, their job, and so they resist. They do not answer the call immediately. We all need time to contemplate those major life changes, and that's exactly what this does, and the second half of Act 1 shows that contemplation, or the problem worsens to the point where they eventually won't have a choice. By the end of the first quarter, we come to what is considered by many to be the most important moment in any novel. Depending on which book you've read on structure, this might be called something slightly different. The inciting incident, the turning point, it's really a matter of semantics. And often, when there is division or debate in craft, confusion usually ensues. You could easily find many chicken or egg arguments in craft that have viable explanations on both sides, which makes perfectly logical sense depending on which argument chimes with you personally. The fact is, the chicken or egg are as one. In such cases, if you step back, you'll find all the various takes on craft, the names coined by numerous writers hoping to put their own stamp on the subject, usually aren't as important as understanding the meaning behind their theories and how it affects your story. The only way to distinguish these things is through reading a lot, including a number of craft books on your TBR list, researching the fundamentals back to where they began to discover what might have been lost or changed in the numerous retellings and translations. On the other hand, if you find a good teacher who speaks to you, it's perfectly fine to stick with them until you understand everything they have to offer and feel it's time to widen your gaze. Every event that incites an action or reaction from your hero is technically an inciting incident, just as every major decision made during a life-changing situation affects the main character's life by various degrees. This is about psychology. The variations of all those psychological shifts are all leading your character somewhere, causing them to consider or even reconsider their choices. The important thing to keep in mind is that the first major plot point or shift occurs at the 25 percentile of any story, coming at or near the end of that first quarter. This first shift is where the hero has come face to face with that life-changing moment and can no longer deny that it's real. The action they take at this point will take them out of their status quo of life, hence why it is to be considered carefully, because it launches your core story and primary story problem. This is the moment when there's no turning back for your hero. Because of its importance, it's worth spending a little time unpacking this subject. Within that psychological stew of traits which comprises your hero, by this point you've shown their better side, their hopes, their dreams, and established their bad habits as well. The reason for careful consideration of what you've established up to now is because life points, meaning your hero is most likely not going to just find themselves in a life-changing situation by accident. And even if it is an accident, or something the main character could not have seen coming, like a natural disaster or Godzilla destroying Tokyo, the characters involved have a reason for being there. That is to say, something in their backstory has given them a strong reason not to run away when things get rough, or a giant lizard attacks their city. Are they scientists, bureaucrats, mythbusters, or treasure seekers? Bottom line, it can be called their life's mission, or their dream, because what they are in their heart of hearts will show this is the moment where they accept their mission, or the challenge. And stepping out of their status quo is what the hero's journey refers to as crossing that first threshold. Whatever their personal reasons are for crossing it, it's often a combination of something set up in their backstory and their current circumstances, which plants them firmly on this path from both physical and psychological circumstances. Because without the psychological drive to motivate their choices, they wouldn't be the hero, the one person who will become the catalyst for whatever results come about in your ending. Thus, we craft our characters to be in the unique position that this could only be their story as they hop into the driver's seat of the vehicle known as plot. If they didn't have strong psychological reasons which link them to the crucible, the container which holds the hero and the villain as they get caught up in the story, then they probably don't have a goal, because that container is going to be the pot held to the flame for your hero as your story progresses. Something brought them to this point, this first plot point, or first major psychological shift, because that's the position crossing the threshold places your hero in. This is why it's such an important shift. Next time, we will look at what this shift brings about, how it affects your hero, their thoughts, their actions, their choices, because every story, every character shifts and evolves. Until then, keep those keyboards clacking.